Hello everyone, myself Vinay Kumaram. I am pursuing PhD in physics. So in this particular YouTube channel, I am teaching physics, chemistry and mathematics starting from 8th standard till 12th standard. So if you want to learn physics, chemistry and mathematics, then please do subscribe to my channel. So in my previous videos, I was actually discussing about the chapter motion. So this is the 8th chapter in 9th standard science subject, that is on force and laws of motion. So in the previous chapter, we have learned that any object which is moving in a particular straight line will be covering certain amount of distance, or it might be displaced from one particular position to other particular position. So in order to do that, there is change in the state of motion. So for example, this particular object was at rest initially. So after giving certain amount of push or certain amount of pull for this particular object, it will move in either x direction or negative x direction. So that means here this particular object is displaced from its initial position. That means now this particular object is no more in rest, it is in motion. So when you put some amount of push for this particular object, it starts moving and it will move to a certain point and it stops at a particular position. What makes this object to move and also what makes this object to stop is the big question which we have to answer in this particular chapter. So now when the object was at rest, this particular position or this particular state is known as state of rest. So now when this particular object is moving, at that particular time we tell that object is in motion. So the state of that particular object is to be in the state of motion. So what caused this object to come to the state of motion and again come back to the rest state? That means here something might be acting on this particular object which is making it to move and which is also making it to come back to rest. And also we have discussed velocity and also acceleration in our previous chapters. So velocity is the distance covered by any particular object in a given time. So this particular velocity, whatever velocity a particular object has, how that particular object maintain that particular velocity. And also in between, if there is change in velocity, either increase or decrease in the velocity, then acceleration comes into picture. So that means here again something is causing to change its velocity. Something is causing to bring a particular object from motion to rest. So that particular thing we call that as force. So this force is the thing which makes this object move, and also the same force is responsible for an object to come to rest, and also the same force is responsible for an object to have acceleration. And also when an object wants to accelerate, at that particular time also force helps that particular object to accelerate. And also if an object has to come to rest, then force helps that particular object to come to rest. So initially people thought that any object, for example, if there is an object on a road and if you give certain amount of push, that means you are actually giving a certain amount of force, this particular object starts moving. So after covering certain amount of distance, this object might come to rest. So when scientists thought about this, for a long period of time, it was thought that coming to rest is the fundamental nature of any particular object in the universe. That means most of the scientists believed that rest is the natural state of an object. So that's why, because rest is the natural state of an object, that object comes to rest. This was the belief which was there before Newton and Galileo. So always you should remember this particular concept which I am telling here is the concept which was there before Galileo and Newton. So before Galileo and Newton came up with their theories, people believed that rest is the natural state of a particular object. So when you give a push for an object, it has to come to rest after a certain period of time, because rest was its natural state. Because initially this particular object was at rest. Only when you apply some force, this object came into the motion. Again, it came back to its original state, that was the rest state. So rest became natural state of this particular object, and this was the idea which was there among people before Galileo and Newton. So now in this particular chapter we will be discussing laws of motion and also will be discussing about force, and by understanding force and laws of motion we will come to know that this particular assumption was wrong, and also we will be learning what are all the laws of motion which governs the motion of a particular object. So now let us try to understand what do you mean by balanced and unbalanced forces. So for example, on a table, if you have a particular object and let's say this particular object is at rest, and let this object be tied with two strings. One is A string and the other is B string. So when you apply equal amount of force in the opposite direction, that is, if you pull this particular string in this direction and if you pull this B string in this particular direction, that means you are applying certain amount of force on this particular object in opposite direction. So if you are applying F1 force at A and if you are applying F2 force at B in opposite direction, and if this F1 force is equal to F2 force, then this particular force can be known as balanced force, because here both the forces are acting in opposite direction and the magnitude of these both forces are equal to each other. Since you are applying same amount of forces on either side in opposite direction, this particular object remain to be in the state of rest. It cannot move because both the forces are equal and opposite to each other. But now if F2 is greater than F1, then this particular object will move towards B. If F1 is greater than F2, then this particular object will move towards A. That means whichever force is the greater force will make that object to move towards that particular force, means move towards the direction in which that force is applied. So here if F1 is greater than F2, so whatever the direction that F1 is acting, in the same direction object starts moving. And if F2 is greater than F1, then the object moves in the direction of F2. So here this kind of forces where forces are opposite to each other but they are not equal to each other. So these kind of forces can be known as unbalanced force, and if both the forces are equal to each other, the opposite forces which are equal to each other, then those kind of forces can be known as balanced force. If you want one more example for unbalanced and balanced force, so for example, if we keep a particular box on a floor and if a person tries to move this particular box, so if this person is trying to move this box in this particular direction, then same amount of frictional force will be acting opposite to this particular applied force, and hence box will not move and it continues to be in the state of rest. So whatever the frictional force, this small f, let us call this as frictional force. So whatever this small amount of frictional force is there, only when the force applied on this box is greater than this particular frictional force, then only box starts moving. That means box will change its state of motion from rest to motion. So box starts moving. So that means now you have applied more force than the frictional force. That means here the force has become unbalanced. But when frictional force was lesser than the applied force, then box started moving. That means here unbalanced force is coming into the picture. So this particular example you can give for unbalanced force. So this is all there in this particular video. The next concepts which are there in this particular chapter I'll be teaching in the subsequent videos. Until then, if you want to learn more physics, chemistry and mathematics, then you have to subscribe to my channel. Please do subscribe to my channel and stay tuned with my channel. Thank you.